They say if you walk alone through Al-Aqsa at night, when the city sleeps and the moonlight glides across its ancient stones, you might hear something you cannot explain. A whisper carried by the wind, a faint hum beneath your feet, as if the earth itself is breathing. You take another step and the silence grows heavier, almost alive, almost aware. For centuries, mystics and scholars have spoken of strange presences that move unseen within the compound, echoes of beings not bound by flesh or form. Some call them protectors, others watchers. But those who know the oldest stories call them what they truly are, the secret guardians of Al-Aqsa. Not angels, not men, but Jinn, bound beneath the sanctuary since the dawn of time. The nights in Jerusalem carry a silence unlike any other. It is not empty, it breathes. The city sleeps, but the stones remember. Each one bears witness to centuries of prayer, conquest, and tears. Yet beneath the surface, far below the call to prayer, in the footsteps of worshipers, there lies another world, one that most eyes will never see. There in the labyrinth of stone and shadow beneath Al-Aqsa, something stirs. Old manuscripts and forgotten oral traditions speak of an echo beneath the sanctuary, a low hum that reverberates through the ground when the air grows cold. Some say it is the sound of the earth itself. Others believe it is the murmur of those bound to guard this holy place since the beginning of time. The scholars of old whisper that this hum is not mere vibration, it is remembrance. A dhikr uttered by tongues unseen, glorifying their Lord in the chambers beneath the sacred rock. In the deep of the night, when the human world withdraws into slumber, the unseen world awakens. Within the hollow spaces below, where even the torchlight of men cannot reach, shapes gather like smoke. They have no faces, no form that the eyes of man could fix upon, but their presence is unmistakable. The air grows dense, vibrating with unseen energy. They move with purpose, as if patrolling something ancient, something they are forbidden to abandon. These are the guardians, created from smokeless fire, their existence woven into the spiritual architecture of the sanctuary itself. There are stories quietly told by those who dwell near the compound of nights when strange lights flicker under the floor of the dome of the rock, or when the marble pillars seem to tremble without reason. Workers who clean the courtyards in the small hours have spoken of hearing faint voices reciting verses they could not understand. One man swore he saw a shadow move across the mihrab, though no one stood there. Another claimed that as he called the adhan before dawn, he heard another voice echoing it from deep beneath the earth, soft, solemn, and unearthly. The elders say the jinn beneath Al-Aqsa are not like others. They are not the wandering spirits of deserts or ruins. They are ancient, disciplined, bound by divine command. Their allegiance was forged long before the first human knee touched this ground in prayer. They do not act on whim. They are keepers of something sacred, something that even they may not fully comprehend. There are records from early scholars who wrote that Prophet Sulaiman once commanded the jinn to construct and guard this very place. When his reign ended, his command did not. The pious among the jinn remained, continuing a heavy vigil as an act of obedience, waiting for the time when their task would be fulfilled. To this day, it is said, they remain beneath the surface, unseen watchers in the house of prayer. At times, the veil between the worlds thins. On certain nights, when the wind flows in from the Mount of Olives and the moon rises above the dome, the boundary between realms becomes almost transparent. Worshippers feel a sudden stillness, as if time itself pauses. They may not see what moves around them, but they feel it. A brush of cold air that does not belong to the season, a rustle that comes from beneath rather than above. In those moments, the guardians are said to draw near, circling the sanctuary, reaffirming their silent oath. Some who have studied the spiritual history of Al-Quds claim that these beings are not merely guardians of a place, but of a secret, a knowledge embedded in the earth since the beginning of human time, a secret that connects heaven and earth, the visible and the unseen. Perhaps that is why Al-Aqsa has always been at the heart of divine struggle, why every empire seeks to claim it, and every prophet has honored it. Because beneath its marble and stone, the world of man meets the world of the unseen. When dawn begins to rise and the first light touches the minarets, the whispers fade, the hum recedes into silence, and the sanctuary returns to stillness. The worshipers will come soon, filling the courtyards with footsteps and prayer. None will know what has passed just hours before, but the guardians will know. They will sink once more into the depths, where the stones are ancient, the air is thick, and the memory of divine command still burns like an ember in the dark. Long before the dome shone under sunlight, and before the call to prayer ever echoed through Jerusalem, there was only an expanse of earth. Silent, untouched, and waiting for the divine decree to give it meaning. The angels once descended upon this place in the earliest days of the world, when mountains were still forming and the winds were pure. They marked the land with reverence, recognizing in it something destined to be sanctified. The light of the throne had touched it, and within its soil was a trace of sacred order, a secret written into the creation of the world itself. The place would one day be known as Al-Aqsa, but at that time it was merely a blessed land, honored before the foundations of cities or the rise of kings. It is said in the oldest traditions that after the descent of Adam upon the earth, the angels guided him to this place of light. There he prayed, his forehead upon the soil that would later cradle countless generations of prophets. He did not yet know the name of this place nor the destiny written for it, but his heart recognized it. It was not chosen by men, but by command from above. Some narrations suggest that Adam was shown two luminous points upon the earth, one where the Kaaba would rise, and the other here, in the land of Bait al-Maqdis. Both were reflections of one light, two mirrors of divine presence upon the world. Between them, the earth found its spiritual balance. Centuries passed and humanity spread, yet the land remained guarded. The winds that passed over it carried the remnants of angelic presence, and in the unseen, ranks of Jinn would watch from afar. There was something about this place that drew them, a radiance that called to both the righteous and the rebellious among them. For even the Jinn could sense the holiness embedded here, though few could bear to linger in its presence without trembling. When the prophets of old began to rise among mankind, they too were drawn to this sacred expanse. It became a place of gathering for those who sought divine proximity. The early servants of Allah, those who carried no scripture but were guided by fitra and light, came here to bow before their Lord. They built no walls and raised no temples, only a platform of stone where their prayers could rise unbroken to the heavens. It was the first light of the sanctuary, a sign that the earth had begun to remember its purpose. The angels would descend at twilight, their wings brushing against the horizon, while unseen watchers stood in the shadows of the hills. The Jinn who dwelled in obedience stood among them, silent witnesses to the worship of men. This harmony between the realms, between the seen and the unseen, was rare and delicate, like a thread of light stretched between worlds. It was said that in those days the distance between heaven and earth was thinner, and the echo of a single prayer could travel beyond the stars. In time, Allah sent his messengers to guide humanity, and among them were those who would make this land their home. Ibrahim came, peace be upon him, guided by revelation, and raised his hands in supplication upon the very soil where Adam once prostrated. It was here that he established one of the earliest sanctuaries dedicated purely to the worship of the one God. His son Ishaq followed, and then Yaqub, each adding their mark to the sacred site. They prayed, taught, and purified the ground of idolatry, leaving behind a legacy of monotheism that would echo for millennia. But as the light spread among mankind, so too did darkness stir. Among the unseen there were those who envied the chosen nature of this land. Some of the Jinn grew restless, drawn by the sanctity, yet corrupted by pride. They whispered among themselves, seeking ways to approach the holy ground. The believing among them warned the others that this place was guarded not by walls, but by decree, that whoever violated its sanctity without permission would be struck by unseen fire. Yet temptation lingered, for within that soil flowed the same spiritual current that bound heaven and earth together. It was during this era that the celestial command was renewed. The angels, led by their appointed guardians, descended once more to mark the sanctuary. They were not alone. Alongside them came unseen ranks of obedient Jinn, servants of the light, who were instructed to sanctify the area and keep it pure. The command was clear: no corrupted being, whether from the race of men or Jinn, was to claim this land for falsehood. It would remain a dwelling for divine remembrance, guarded in both realms. From that moment, the spiritual bond deepened. The very air around the sanctuary carried the resonance of unseen remembrance. The wind that brushed through its stones was said to carry praises in languages unknown to man. Those who prayed there often described feeling as if they were not alone, as though invisible companions stood beside them in worship. This was not my imagination, for indeed, from that time onward, the guardianship of Al-Aqsa belonged not only to men, but to the unseen as well. Among the Jinn were those whose hearts were drawn to the obedience of the Most High. They swore an oath to protect what was sacred, to preserve it from corruption until the end of time. They moved unseen, their forms merging with shadow, their voices mingling with the hum of the wind. The angels watched them, for even among the unseen there were trials of faith. Yet those who remained steadfast became known as the hidden custodians of the sanctuary, a lineage of Jinn loyal to the divine command. When the prophets came to Jerusalem, they found this bond already established. Daud prayed upon its heights and heard the echo of unseen tasbih rising with his own. Sulaiman, wise and favored, would one day inherit not only the land, but the authority to command those hidden guardians. But that time had not yet come. For now, the Jinn remained silent under divine command, bound to watch and wait as human history unfolded above them. The arrival of the Jinn upon the land was not sudden, but destined. They came like the unseen tide, called by the divine decree that shaped their purpose. From the deserts beyond the Jordan to the valleys of ancient Canaan, they gathered, drawn to the resonance of sacred energy that radiated from beneath the rock. They could not approach without permission, and when they did, it was not as conquerors, but as sentinels. The believing among them took their stations beneath the foundations, in caverns untouched by human hands, where light does not reach, but remembrance never ceases. They became part of the living spirit of the place, their existence intertwined with its holiness. When storms gathered over the city, they whispered praises. When prophets prayed upon its soil, they listened in reverence. And when desecration touched the sanctuary, they trembled, for even the unseen could feel the weight of sin upon sacred ground. Thus began their long vigil beneath Al-Aqsa, a guardianship not of choice, but of covenant. Bound by the same celestial command that sanctified the earth itself, they became watchers of the unseen frontier. protectors of a secret older than memory, older than stone. The years passed, and the divine covenant continued through the chosen messengers. Prophets came and went, each carrying their burden of guidance and their share of trials. Yet among them there were a few who walked the paths of Al-Quds with knowledge that surpassed the limits of ordinary men. They understood that this sanctuary was more than a place of worship. It was a doorway between worlds. Beneath the courtyard where men prayed and children played, another realm was alive, a realm of light and shadow where the unseen kept their vigil. These prophets knew of them, spoke to them, and sometimes commanded them by permission of Allah. When Prophet Ibrahim built the house in Makkah, he raised it for the remembrance of the One. But when he came to the land of Bayt al-Maqdis, he found the earth already marked with sanctity. He prayed there and was shown a vision of what was hidden. Legions of Jinn standing in silent obedience beneath the land. They were neither evil nor good by form, but by choice. Some among them had long ago accepted the covenant, while others resisted it. Ibrahim was shown that the guardianship of this land was not a human inheritance alone, but a shared trust between realms. He was told, "This land is blessed for those who remember, both of men and of jinn." From Ibrahim's lineage came many prophets who walked the stones of Al-Quds: Yaqub, Yusuf, Musa, and Dawood. Each of them felt the pulse of that unseen world, though none harnessed its depths until Sulaiman. Dawood, the father, was known for his psalms that softened hearts, but it was Sulaiman who inherited not only his wisdom, but his command over the unseen. When he was granted kingship, the earth itself seemed to respond to his will. The winds carried his armies, and the jinn worked under his authority, building and shaping as he ordered. Yet above all his power, he remained a servant of Allah, never claiming divinity, always bowing in gratitude. Under his reign, the sanctuary of Al-Aqsa entered a new era. He ordered that the site be purified, rebuilt, and fortified. He commanded both men and jinn to labor side by side. The air was filled with sounds beyond human hearing, chants of obedience from invisible throats, the rustling of wings and the echo of divine names. Massive stones were moved not by machines but by unseen strength. Walls were raised that shone under the sun like molten gold. From the depths of the earth, the jinn brought materials unknown to mankind. Rare gems, metals that glimmered in strange hues, and stones that seemed to breathe with light. Witnesses of that time spoke of strange phenomena. They said the ground beneath Al-Quds would glow faintly at night, as if fire moved within its core. They said that winds carried whispers of commands issued in languages long forgotten. Sulaiman's dominion was unlike any before or after, for his rule extended not just over men and beasts, but over the hidden creation. He was given the knowledge of the jinn, their ranks, their names, and their oaths. One of his greatest commands was the reconstruction of the sacred sanctuary. The jinn built with precision beyond human measure, stacking stones so vast that no mortal could move them. They carved inscriptions in places where no hand could reach, marks of obedience sealed beneath the foundation. But among the jinn who served were also those whose hearts wavered. Pride began to stir in some, and envy burned in others. They whispered among themselves, questioning why a man of clay should command beings made of fire. They forgot the wisdom that their power was not their own, but granted by the decree of the Most High. When their whispers reached Sulaiman, he knew. Nothing of the unseen escaped him, for Allah had granted him hearing beyond the limits of the world. He summoned them before his throne, his eyes calm yet piercing. "You were created for obedience, not for arrogance," he said. "You were given power not to rule, but to serve." The rebellious ones trembled, but their pride held them silent. Sulaiman, by Allah's permission, sealed them beneath the very ground they had built upon. It is said that he bound them with words that no tongue could utter and names that no being could break. Deep below the sanctuary, in chambers carved by their own hands, he sealed them with symbols of divine authority. The believing jinn remained above, continuing their service in peace. But those who had turned against the covenant were imprisoned beneath, their voices silenced, their forms confined within darkness. Over each seal, Sulaiman inscribed the name of the Lord, so that no power could undo what had been decreed. As the years passed, the imprisoned ones became a legend among their kind. The believing jinn spoke of them as a warning, a reminder of what pride could do to those once honored with trust. They continued their duty, maintaining the sanctity of Al-Aqsa as their master had commanded. They guarded its foundations from corruption, purifying it with unending remembrance. In their realm of shadow and stone, they sang praises that resonated through the earth, a vibration that the sensitive among men could sometimes feel as a tremor beneath their feet. After the death of Sulaiman, his body remained standing for a time, leaning upon his staff. The jinn continued their labor, unaware that their master's soul had already been taken. They worked under the illusion of his watchful gaze until a creature of the earth gnawed through the staff and his body fell. Only then did they realize the truth, that they had been toiling long after his passing. The news spread among the unseen, and many wept, for they had served not out of fear, but out of love and reverence. Yet even after his death, his commands endured. The seals he placed upon the rebellious jinn remained unbroken, guarded by divine decree. The believers among them took oaths to ensure that no hand, human or unseen, would ever release those bound beneath. They became the silent watchers of the sanctuary, protectors of a covenant older than empires. In the ages that followed, empires rose and fell above the holy ground. The Babylonians, the Persians, the Romans, all came and went. The stones of Al-Aqsa bore their scars, yet beneath the surface, the guardians remained unchanged. The believing jinn kept their vigil, whispering remembrance through the centuries. Sometimes their presence was felt, a cold wind sweeping through the courtyard, a flicker of light within the rock, a voice in the stillness of night. Those who were pure of heart recognized it as Baraka, but those whose hearts were veiled felt only fear. The rebellious jinn, however, still lay bound beneath. It is said that they whisper even now, their voices trapped within the deep chambers Sulaiman sealed. They murmur of the freedom they once had, of the arrogance that destroyed them, and of the day when the earth will shake and their confinement will finally end. But until that hour, they remain prisoners beneath the sanctuary, beneath the stones of light and prayer, where divine words are carved into eternity. And so, long after the prophet king's throne turned to dust, the guardianship of Al-Aqsa continued, not in the hands of kings or conquerors, but in the unseen realm below. There the believing jinn still moved like shadows of light, circling the sacred heart of the sanctuary, fulfilling the command they swore before time began. The dome of the rock shimmered like a golden flame against the twilight sky. Beneath it, deep within the foundation of the sanctuary, lay chambers that had not been touched by human hands in centuries. The air was thick with an ancient weight, a silence so profound it seemed alive. There were whispers among the caretakers of Al-Aqsa, tales passed down through the generations about a place below the known ground, an area sealed since the earliest days of Islam. Some said it was where Prophet Sulaiman once stood when commanding the jinn to build the temple. Others whispered it was where the restless among them were bound by his divine authority. Whatever the truth, it was said that those who ventured too deep felt a presence, a silent watchfulness, like the gaze of unseen eyes from another realm. In a night of restless winds, a scholar named Yusuf descended beneath the sanctuary with only a lantern and his faith. He had studied the old scrolls, fragments of text that spoke of Makan al-Makhfi, the hidden place. The writings hinted that beneath the layers of rock were chambers where Sulaiman had sealed rebellious spirits, binding them with divine names inscribed upon stone tablets. As Yusuf stepped through a narrow archway, the air changed. It grew colder, the light of his lantern bending unnaturally, as though something invisible shifted around him. His heart pounded, but he recited Ayat al-Kursi softly, each word echoing against the ancient walls. He came upon carvings, strange twisting inscriptions, unlike any Arabic he knew. Some were etched so deep into the stone that they pulsed faintly with a reddish glow when his light touched them. Yusuf realized these were not written by human hands. The stories of the workers of fire and smoke came to life before him. He placed his hand upon one of the inscriptions and felt heat beneath the stone, as if the wall itself were alive. Then, faintly, he heard something, a low hum, rhythmic and ancient, like a voice reciting something from beyond human understanding. He withdrew his hand and stepped back, whispering Bismillah. The air trembled, and from the shadows emerged a faint mist that formed shapes resembling faces, shifting and dissolving. They did not attack, they only watched, as if bound by something greater than themselves. Yusuf turned away, his heart trembling with awe, realizing he had glimpsed the guardians of the old world, the unseen protectors still stationed beneath the house of God. As dawn broke over Jerusalem, the call to prayer echoed through the courtyards. The city awoke unaware of what still moved beneath their feet, but those who served in Al-Aqsa could sometimes sense it, like a pulse from the earth itself, a sacred heartbeat that reminded them this place was more than stone and soil. It was a gate between the seen and the unseen, guarded by forces long pledged to divine service. In the early centuries of Islam, when Caliph Umar entered Jerusalem, it is said that a strange stillness overtook the city as he approached the site of Al-Aqsa. The Christians who accompanied him spoke of a light descending upon the area, though no source could be found. Umar himself remarked that the land seemed to breathe. After the mosque was established, some of his men reported dreams of luminous beings standing by the sanctuary at night, their forms shifting between light and smoke. The caliph did not dismiss their words. Instead, he ordered that no one should ever desecrate or disturb the foundations of the structure, declaring them a trust between heaven and earth. Centuries later, when crusaders seized Jerusalem, they found tunnels beneath the site and wrote of echoing chambers and hollow winds that spoke when none were there. Some knights swore that they saw shadows move along the walls when they carried torches. A few who entered the lowest passage never returned. These tales became myths in Europe, blending with stories of demons and ancient kings. Yet the believers in Jerusalem knew the truth, that what the crusaders had stumbled upon were not demons, but the bound servants of Sulaiman, still fulfilling their covenant to protect what God had sanctified. Time moved forward, empires rose and fell, but the mystery endured. In the Ottoman era, a Sufi mystic named Sheikh Abdul Qadir al-Jazairi spent nights in deep meditation near the mihrab of Al-Aqsa. He claimed that in the stillness before Fajr, he would hear whispers of tasbih not from human lips, but from the stones themselves. When questioned, he said, "This place breathes with the remembrance of Allah. Its protectors are not flesh and blood, but light bound by command." Many dismissed it as poetry, but those who had felt the inexplicable peace of the sanctuary at night knew his words carried truth. As centuries passed, archaeologists and explorers continued to be drawn to Al-Aqsa's depths. In the 20th century, British researchers claimed to discover sealed doorways beneath the dome of the rock. Yet every attempt to enter them ended abruptly. Equipment malfunctioned, lights flickered out, and sounds like distant voices were reported. A few workers refused to return, claiming they heard recitations in languages unknown. The official reports were silenced, the entrances sealed again. Some said the ground itself rejected intrusion. Others whispered that the old guardians had stirred once more, warning mankind not to trespass into the sacred space decreed by divine law. Even today, stories persist among the night guards of Al-Aqsa. They speak of winds that move without air, lights that glide across marble without shadow, and the subtle fragrance of musk appearing from nowhere. Some guards have resigned after witnessing shapes in the darkness. Tall figures with luminous outlines standing silently near the dome before vanishing. These encounters are never recorded, never reported. They are understood as reminders that the sanctuary is alive, guarded not only by men, but by the unseen servants of Allah. The world above may forget, distracted by politics and power, but the realm beneath remembers. Deep below the sanctified ground, beyond human reach, the seals of Sulaiman still hold. The guardians remain, unseen yet vigilant, preserving the sanctity of the place from those who would defile it. In the stillness of the night, when the city sleeps and the muezzin's voice fades, they awaken, not in rebellion, but in remembrance. They are the watchers, the protectors of the threshold between worlds, fulfilling an ancient covenant until the command of their Lord releases them. In the depth of a quiet night, when the winds carried the scent of olive and stone through the old streets of Jerusalem, an aged scholar named Ahmad al-Haddad sat in the courtyard of Al-Aqsa with a candle by his side. He was one of the few who had studied not just theology, but also the old tales of the prophets that were rarely spoken aloud. His beard had turned white, his eyes dim with years, but his heart was alive with remembrance. He often told the younger students, "This place is not just built on history, it breathes with the remnants of divine command." Most of them thought he spoke in metaphor, until one night when the unseen chose to remind the living of its presence. It was after the last prayer of the night. The sanctuary was silent, empty except for Ahmad and the distant echo of a muezzin's voice carried by the wind. As he recited Quran softly beneath the silver glow of the moon, he felt something shift in the air, a presence ancient and weighty, pressing against the stillness. The candle flame wavered, though no breeze passed through. He stopped his recitation, heart steady, lips whispering dhikr. From the shadows of the courtyard, the faint outline of a tall figure appeared, neither human nor entirely of smoke. It shimmered faintly, as though light was trapped within it. The old scholar did not move. He only recited, "A'udhu billahi min ash-shaytan ar-rajim." The figure bowed slightly, as though acknowledging him, then faded, leaving behind only the scent of rain and musk. Ahmed knew then that he had been honored, not haunted. The old guardians still lingered, drawn to the words of remembrance, keeping their silent watch. The following nights, strange occurrences stirred the hearts of those who served the mosque. Guards claimed to hear footsteps pacing the marble floors when none were present. Others saw faint glimmers moving between the pillars, reflections of light without a source. One night, a caretaker fainted near the mihrab, saying he had heard voices chanting in unison, "Subhanallah," echoing from beneath the ground. The imams did not dismiss these stories. They only advised the men to increase their prayers and guard their tongues. For it was well known among those who lived close to the sanctuary that the world of the Jinn was not distant, It was layered upon the human world like shadows over sunlight. The elders of Jerusalem often spoke of a covenant made long ago. When Prophet Sulaiman ruled by divine command, he had ordered the Jinn to assist in building not only his temple, but also in protecting the sacred spaces that would come after. Those loyal to him were not cast into fire or rebellion. They were appointed as unseen caretakers, bound by verses and divine names that anchored them to their duty. And among them, there were ranks, some luminous and obedient, others wild but restrained by the authority of the Prophet King. The site of Al-Aqsa was said to be the last place on earth where that covenant still remained unbroken. When the world around it trembled with conflict, the unseen still guarded its heart. Generations later, during the times of unrest, when foreign forces entered Jerusalem, there were reports of strange happenings. Soldiers camping near the sanctuary complained of voices whispering in languages none could recognize. Some claimed their torches were extinguished without wind, and a few deserted their posts, insisting that invisible hands had pulled at their garments during the night. The commanders mocked them, but the local believers only shook their heads. They knew better than to laugh at warnings that came from the unseen. It was said that those who mocked or desecrated the sacred ground often fell ill or lost their senses before leaving the city. The protectors of Al-Aqsa did not shed blood. They simply removed those unworthy of remaining upon the holy soil. Centuries passed, and the memory of these tales faded into legend. Yet every so often, the veil between worlds would thin, and someone would bear witness to the truth. In the late Ottoman period, an engineer was sent to inspect the foundations beneath Al-Aqsa after minor tremors were felt in the area. As he descended into one of the older corridors, he found himself unable to breathe. The air was thick, electric, alive. He described hearing a low hum, as if the very stones vibrated with unseen energy. When he tried to proceed further, his lantern burst into flame and then extinguished itself completely. In total darkness, he heard what he later described as the sound of wings, rhythmic and echoing through the chamber. He fled back to the surface, pale and trembling, refusing to return. His written report was brief and cryptic. There is life below, but it is not ours to disturb. Among the local scholars, these stories were never dismissed. They were read as reminders of divine order, that the unseen world continued its duties even when men forgot theirs. Some Sufi masters taught that the jinn beneath Al-Aqsa were not evil, nor were they free. They were bound to serve as guardians of what Allah had sanctified, watching over the sanctuary until the final hour. It was said that in every age, one among the pious would sense their presence, receiving dreams of luminous beings standing guard around the sanctuary. In these dreams, the guardians spoke not in words but in feeling, a communication of reverence, sorrow, and vigilance, as though mourning the heedlessness of men. During the British Mandate, when excavation attempts began, again under the guise of archaeology, the same disturbances returned. Equipment malfunctioned inexplicably, compasses spun wildly, and workers spoke of feeling as though they were being watched. Some reported hearing a voice warning them in clear Arabic, "Do not uncover what was sealed by command." A few weeks later, the project was quietly halted. No official explanation was given, but the local imams understood. The covenant of Sulaiman was not to be broken by curiosity. Years later, when modern conflicts scarred the city and the call to prayer was drowned by the sound of war, the faithful believed that the guardians still remained. Some said that during bombardments, light was seen descending upon the dome of the rock, soft, radiant, and unmoving even as explosions raged nearby. Pilgrims reported dreams of unseen forces forming a circle of light around the sanctuary, protecting it while the world above burned. Whether these were visions or mercy from the unseen, no one could say. But faith does not require sight, only certainty. Even now, the scholars who study the hidden sciences of the Quran point to verses where Allah speaks of the Jinn as communities, some believing, some rebellious. They remind that among them are those who worship and remember their Lord, just as mankind does. The guardians beneath Al-Aqsa are said to be of this believing kind, those who found honor in servitude and protection. Their covenant endures through silence, through watchfulness, through the heartbeat of the sacred ground itself. Those who have prayed alone in the stillness before dawn within Al-Aqsa sometimes feel it, the quiet trembling of the air, the echo of tasbih that seems to rise not from their own lips, but from the stones beneath their feet. The truth remains layered, neither entirely myth nor entirely material. For the sanctuary is a place where the veil thins, where worlds meet under the decree of the Almighty. And while men argue over its ownership, the unseen keep their watch undisturbed, waiting for the command that only one can give. In the final years before the great silence that settled over the ancient city, rumors began to spread among the inhabitants of Jerusalem that the ground beneath Al-Aqsa had begun to stir again. It was subtle at first, a vibration that could only be felt by those who walked barefoot in the courtyards at night. The imams dismissed it as imagination, the murmurs of restless hearts. But the older caretakers, those who had spent decades in service, knew it was something else. They whispered among themselves that the old guardians were awakening, not in rebellion, but in remembrance, preparing for what was to come. A young student named Ibrahim had heard these tales since childhood. His grandfather had served as a caretaker before him and often spoke of the watchers beneath the stone. Ibrahim was skeptical. He was a man of science, raised in the age of logic and evidence, yet something within him, something he could never quite name, drew him to the sanctuary after midnight, when the last footsteps faded and the world fell still. He would walk beneath the towering arches, tracing his fingers along the cool marble walls, listening to the faint hum that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. One night as he stood by the mihrab, the air shifted. The scent of jasmine and musk filled the air, though no flowers grew nearby. His heart raced as the temperature dropped suddenly, his breath visible in the darkness. Then he heard it, a single word whispered close to his ear, though no one was there. Tadakar, remember. He turned sharply, lantern trembling in his hand, but found nothing. Only the echo of his own breathing filled the space. Yet deep in Shiota, he felt something awaken, a memory that was not his own, as though the stones themselves had spoken through him. From that night onward, Ibrahim began to study not just the material history of Al-Aqsa, but the unseen one. He sought out old manuscripts, hidden texts preserved in family libraries, and oral stories told by the few remaining mystics of the city. All pointed to one truth. The guardians of the sanctuary were bound by divine command, but their silence would one day end when the final signs of the hour drew near. Years passed and the city changed. The world grew louder, filled with noise, technology, and conflict. Yet within the walls of Al-Aqsa, the silence deepened, as though the earth was holding its breath. Strange incidents began to occur. Pilgrims reported seeing light descend from the heavens, illuminating the dome even when the skies were dark. Guards spoke of hearing chants in languages long forgotten, rhythmic and resonant, echoing through the stone corridors. A few saw shadows that glided across the walls like mist, vanishing when approached. The scholars who studied these events in secret began to recall a narration from the ancient times that near the end of days, the sanctuaries of Allah would speak and their protectors would stir. One evening, a storm unlike any in memory swept across Jerusalem. The winds howled, rain lashed the stones, and lightning illuminated the sky in flashes of blue and white. As thunder rolled, a caretaker stationed near the underground entrance claimed he heard the sound of chains breaking. Not metal, but something far older, as though the bindings of time itself were snapping apart. He fled to the upper courtyard, trembling, and when the storm passed, he swore he saw faint pillars of light rising from beneath the ground before fading into the dawn. No one believed him, but that night, every bird that roosted on the dome took flight and did not return until morning. In the months that followed, Ibrahim returned to the sanctuary once more, this time as an old man. His hair was gray, his hands weak, but his eyes still carried that searching light. He had spent his life piecing together fragments of forgotten knowledge. Scrolls from Andalus, oral testimonies from Bedouin tribes, writings from early scholars who spoke of Sulaiman's covenant. All pointed to a singular prophecy, that the guardians of the unseen would rise in defense of the holy sanctuaries before the final age, when the world would drown in disbelief and desecration. As he sat beneath the olive trees one night, a breeze passed through the courtyard, carrying with it the faint hum of recitation. It was not human, yet it filled him with peace. The verses were those of Surah Al-Isra, the very chapter that speaks of the night journey of the Prophet and the sanctity of the blessed land. The realization struck him deeply. The guardians were not beings of wrath, but of remembrance. They were reciting as they had been commanded since time immemorial, upholding the echo of divine remembrance when mankind forgot. Elsewhere in the city, a different story was unfolding. During renovations on the western side of the compound, workers uncovered a sealed archway buried beneath centuries of debris. Behind it lay a narrow passage descending into darkness. The officials, bound by regulation, marked it for future study, but word spread quickly among the residents. The elders warned them not to disturb it, reminding them that the Prophet Sulaiman had sealed the gates of the unseen with the names of Allah. But curiosity triumphed over fear. A small group descended one afternoon, carrying lights and tools. What they found changed them forever. The walls of the passage were covered with inscriptions glowing faintly like molten gold, verses of power, divine words written in languages older than Arabic, older than Hebrew. The deeper they went, the heavier the air became until one of them collapsed, unable to breathe. The others panicked and turned back. As they fled, a deep, resonant sound filled the corridor, like 1,000 voices whispering the Shahada in unison. When they emerged into the daylight, the door behind them sealed itself with a sound that echoed like thunder. No one dared open it again. The scholars who heard of this event gathered secretly. They compared it to the writings of ancient mystics who claimed that beneath the sanctuary lay 7 chambers, each guarded by ranks of the Jinn, each marked by one of the sacred names of Allah. It was said that those chambers held not treasure, but divine decrees, seals protecting the balance between worlds. If ever disturbed, the guardians would awaken to restore what man had broken. Years turned into decades, and as the world descended further into turmoil, Al-Aqsa remained standing, its walls scarred but unbroken, its sanctity preserved through means unseen. The elders who prayed within its courtyards began to feel a change in the air during the nights of worship. The call to prayer echoed longer than usual, reverberating through the stone and dust as though answered from below. Pilgrims spoke of seeing figures in white standing on the ramparts, luminous and still, their faces hidden, their presence neither frightening nor human. When approached, they vanished like mist. Ibrahim's final days were spent within those walls. As his strength faded, he would sit facing the dome of the rock, whispering verses under his breath. On his last night, as the moon rose above the golden roof, he felt a calm descend upon him, unlike any he had known before. He closed his eyes, and in that silence, he heard them, the guardians chanting softly, their voices merging with the wind, their praise rising to the heavens. He smiled, understanding at last what his grandfather had meant. The sanctuary was never alone. When dawn broke, the caretakers found him seated peacefully, his prayer beads in hand, his lips curved in a faint smile. The candle beside him had not burned out, though the night had long passed. Some said that as they carried his body in through the courtyard, a faint fragrance of musk filled the air and lingered for days. The scholars took it as a sign. The unseen had come to escort a soul who had spent his life seeking their truth. And so the legend continued, not written in books, but whispered in prayers and carried in hearts. Beneath the stones of Al-Aqsa, where light meets shadow, the watchers remain. They do not sleep, nor do they fade. They wait in obedience, their covenant unbroken, until the final dawn calls both worlds to witness what has been hidden since the beginning. As the sun sets over the golden dome, its light spilling across the ancient courtyards, the city falls silent once more. Generations have passed, empires have risen and crumbled, yet Al-Aqsa remains, untouched in its sanctity, guarded not only by the prayers of men, but by the unseen sentinels who still linger in the shadows. The air within its walls carries an echo older than stone, a rhythm that speaks of remembrance, obedience, and divine trust. Every whisper of wind through its arches seems to tell the same story, that no matter how much time erases from memory, the covenant beneath its soil endures. The guardians who were once commanded by Sulaiman still fulfill their vow in silence, watching, waiting, reciting the words of their Lord when the world above forgets them. And perhaps in the stillness before Fajr, when the stars fade and the first call to prayer pierces the dawn, if one listens closely enough, they will hear it too, the faint hum of tasbih rising from beneath the sanctuary. It is a sound of devotion without end, a reminder that between the realms of light and shadow, faith is never lost, only guarded.